Hello, my name is Kerry Davis, and our group topic is performance-based funding and adult learners. My group members are Dominique Weston, Evelyn Ben, and Anthony Kaltner. The introduction. What is performance-based funding, or PBF? Performance-based funding changes the way states subsidize public higher education. Under PBF, colleges receive state appropriations according to how well they are meeting educational goals, like college completion and degree production. By rewarding institutions for the number of degrees given rather than focusing on enrollment, PBF provides an incentive for colleges to graduate more students. Why is this important? Over the past few decades, there have been pressures for accountability in higher education due to concerns over the price of college and institutional productivity. We also know that enrollment at most institutions increase every year, but college completion rates have not. So PBF serves as a form of accountability. Supporters of PBF say that state funding models or financing higher education is inefficient and unresponsive to students' and taxpayers' needs. By linking state appropriations to the number of degrees produced rather than the number of students enrolled, this funding model induces our institutions to generate more graduates. How does PBF relate to adult and continuing education? To answer this question, you must look at both adult and continuing education and PBF and what they are really about. Adult education is concerned with helping people to live more successfully. If there is an overarching function of adult education, it is to assist adults to increase competence or negotiate transitions in their social roles and to help them gain greater fulfillment in their personal lives. PBF is all about rewarding institutions for the number of degrees given. In the end, both PBF and adult education is all about helping people have better lives or access to resources through funding. The overview. Institutions are starting to use PBF, but is it having its intended effects? The results of graduation rates and degree completions are mixed. Several institutional level and state level analyses have found a range of generally modest effects. Analysis of PBF programs using data from multiple states have found negative impacts on graduation in the 4-year sector, a mix of positive, negative, and insignificant across states in the 2-year and 4-year sectors, and some evidence that long-standing PBF programs increase graduation rates. What surprised me is that there was no statistically significant relationship between the presence of PBF and total revenue or total expenditures. The presence of PBF is associated with a small and marginally significant $107 increase in state and local appropriations. This means that as states adopt PBF, they are making at least some additional funds available to institutions.
This is Dominique Weston speaking, continuing with the overview. There are numerous sources for national data repositories, agencies, and organizations where you can learn more about performance-based funding. One agency is the National Conference of State Legislatures. This is a great source for finding information about higher education legislation, specifically the Higher Education Outcomes-Based Funding Act passed in 2011. It was implemented to finance a system of higher education and to secure an equitable distribution of state funds deemed to be available for higher education. According to their research on PBF, historically, many colleges receive state funding based on how many full-time equivalent students were enrolled at the beginning of the semester. This model provides incentives for colleges to enroll students and thus provides access to post-secondary education. But this model does not necessarily provide incentives for institutions to help students successfully complete degree programs. Many states are reconsidering the enrollment-based funding model and instead are aligning funding models with state goals and priorities. Now we will discuss the background of performance-based funding. Though the National Conference of State Legislatures portrays it this way, unfortunately, this kind of funding model is not perfect. The first project-based funding model was implemented in Tennessee in 1979. The National Conference of State Legislators reported that 32 states have some form of project-based funding for higher education as of 2015. Project-based funding models became popular in the 1990s, but during the mid-2000s, their presence declined as states dealt with series of economic downturns, causing many to remove the performance component from their funding criteria. This first wave of project-based funding policies is referred to as Project-Based Funding 1.0. Most research on Project-Based Funding 1.0 has shown that these policies did not produce significant increases in student outcomes. Some problems that led to the rejection of project-based funding 1.0, where funding instability, a relatively small portion of funds being tied to performance, uneven knowledge about performance-based funding within and across colleges, inappropriate performance metrics, uneven and inadequate institutional capacity, and institutions gaming the system. Another problem with performance-based funding is its effect on access for specific kinds of students. Increasing funding allocations makes it more difficult for students who are traditionally disadvantaged to gain access to college because the colleges fear losing funding by recruiting students who are not college ready. Because institutions cannot always matriculate students who struggle to succeed, who often come from troubled backgrounds, institutions improve their overall performance by restricting admissions. They can also accomplish this by only recruiting in areas where there are more students who are more likely to do well in college, usually students from a higher socioeconomic status. This decreases the likelihood of diverse applicants becoming recruited. Additionally, it increases the likelihood of colleges that serve higher achieving students to receive more funding than other colleges, further perpetuating the achievement gap. Lastly, states support education to improve economic competitiveness, train good citizens, and create more equitable societies. But the social value of these potential benefits is hard to measure. Legislators adopt new state policies or interventions because they live by short term election cycles and can claim credit for identifying and solving problems without being held accountable for the long term implementation of those policies. Although states can provide colleges and universities with incentives for graduating more students, these policies still do not reward faculty and staff for their work. State policies fail to acknowledge that college and university employees are strongly motivated by pro-social values. When performance-based funding policies are adopted, they focus reporting and assessment on student outcomes and not on whether colleges are providing equitable access to higher education. The original rationale for state intervention in higher education sector was to increase college graduation rates and to increase non-market accountability to public education systems. This is still the case, but the best way to reach that goal has changed. Previously, states accomplished this by increasing spending to open new colleges and universities or by providing financial aid and subsidizing the cost of higher education. States have increasingly adopted performance-based funding policies to increase accountability and efficiency, or in other words, to get more bang for their buck. But as we will discuss more in depth later, performance-based funding policies do not increase numbers of college graduates. The photo here depicts the United States and the different states that have performance-based funding based on the institution type.
This is Anthony Keltner, and I will be discussing a few issues and challenges associated with performance-based funding. Even though there are a multitude of issues and challenges that affect outcomes from performance-based funding metrics, we've identified three that are the most challenging to overcome. These include student characteristics, insufficient state financial support, and institutional resistance. Community colleges tend to enroll students with a greater range of diversity as it pertains to academic knowledge acquired in their high school years when compared with larger universities. Because of this, retention and graduation rates are harder to maintain at these institutions, which then puts them at a disadvantage when metrics look at their data with little to no context. States are also not financially supporting these massive changes after putting them in place. State funding is coming with more demands, but unfortunately funding is not keeping pace. No change, large or small, can be expected to meet expectations when proper support is not given. Due to the money set aside by performance funding, colleges and universities are desperate to get their hands on some portion of it. Many schools are even willing to lower their academic standards and eliminate hard-to-pass classes that are needed to graduate in order to artificially boost their graduation rates. Typically, this does not sit well with faculty and educators on campuses. As a certified teacher myself, I would be appalled at the suggestion of sacrificing academic standards for monetary gain. This is the predicament, however, that many colleges are placing onto their professors. As you can see, the challenges facing effective implementation of performance-based funding metrics are multi-layered issues that require discourse among lawmakers on both sides of the aisle.
Despite all these issues and challenges, there are many innovations that you can see in these areas. This is Evelyn Ben speaking now. The most cited states with noteworthy performance-based funding systems include Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Tennessee, Washington, and Louisiana. When reviewing the literature, a few innovations in these systems are worth discussing here and stuck out to us as a group. In Ohio, their funding formula rewards the achievements of at-risk students as defined by economic, demographic, and college preparedness data. This encourages rather than penalizes schools for enrolling such students and also counteracts the complaint that performance-based funding measures cause the narrowing of institutional admissions and restrictions of student admissions. Indiana also does something interesting in terms of how they factor enrollment numbers into their funding systems. We're all aware that traditional enrollment numbers are not reliable indicators of performance. Rather than use a start of semester count, as we mentioned earlier, they use an end of semester count to put more focus on course completion. Pennsylvania includes diversity of faculty and reduction in achievement gaps as part of their formula for funding, all while taking away the competitiveness by removing additional funding for institutions that outperform state set outcomes. Competitiveness between institutions is a common negative impact of performance-based funding, and Pennsylvania seems to be one of the few states that's trying to counteract this occurrence. On the screen now are a few different data sources that you can refer to learn more about this. We've mentioned the first one up there, which is a great website, and it includes all the current statistics on the different bills and legislations passed. The second one is a study done by Research for Action, which is a great read. It's very impartial. The third one up here is a long read, but it really goes into the historical literature on performance-based funding. It has great sections on all the different impacts, from minor impacts to major impacts, and different things that will pop up as obstacles while trying to put performance-based funding systems into place in school systems. Some different things that we learned as a group going through this material was the strong connection between adult education and learning outcomes and targets for performance-based funding. There's a great willingness to rethink and revise what is considered traditional, and we thought it was really cool how these two things paired up very nicely to meet the needs of students. It was also interesting for us to learn that the amount of funding within performance-based funding systems varies. We kind of all assumed it was a one and done or a set value, but these things are negotiated. So, for example, with Indiana, only 5% of an institution's funding comes from these performance factors. Ohio started at 5%, they're moving towards 30% in a few years, and Tennessee, which is really aggressive in their performance-based funding, started at 80%. These change over time and are typically revisited, but it's definitely something that varies from state to state. Last but not least, on the screen now are all of the resources we used to pull together this video for you. We hope you enjoyed and learned a lot about performance-based funding. Thank you for listening.